Hey, what's up? John Sonmez from simpleprogrammer.com. So as I'm wrapping up the year here of 2016, I don't know, this video might be coming out in January, probably will. I thought I would talk about something that a lot of people do at this time of year, which is to create New Year's resolutions or to set goals. And I wanted to give you kind of my opinion on whether you should do that and what is most effective in this area and how to really make changes in your life, right? Because I've made some pretty big change. 2016 was a big year of change for me. You can check out the video on my kind of summary of 2016, but today I want to talk about setting goals, making resolutions, making changes. So I think that a particular calendar year or a particular point on a calendar is not the best time to decide to make changes. If you want to make changes in your life, they kind of have to be instantaneous. You have to make a decision and then go forward and tackle that and decide that you're going to do that thing, not wait for a particular time. One of the biggest downfalls that we have when we plan things out and we're like, okay, starting January 1st, I'm gonna start eating healthy, is that probably if you do that, then you're gonna have this huge window where you're just gonna eat a ton of, you're gonna go batshit crazy, and then that's gonna make it so more likely that you're gonna fail when you start your new thing, and then when you fail, you're gonna set a new date, and you can actually hurt yourself by doing that, where you're setting goals in the future. Instead, if you say, I'm gonna make changes absolutely right now, that's going to be a lot more effective. And the way that you do that is you change the context, right? So you've got to come up with a real good motivation, a reason why you're going to change, and a new identity for yourself if you want to change. A lot of people try to make changes, they try to change their behavior, but they don't change their identity. And that's a fatal flaw in making a change, because you're not going to have successful change in your life. You're not going to be able to fulfill resolutions and to actually become a different person if you don't become a different person or view yourself as a different person. There's a real good book on this subject that I've talked about a lot. It's called Cybernetics, and it's all about your identity and how basically your body, your mind can't help but act exactly how it thinks you are. So if you want to change your action, if you want to change what you're doing, you got to change your identity. You got to change your ego. You got to change your self-esteem, your self-view of yourself. And so that's critical. So what I would suggest that you do instead of making resolutions is, can you change the context? Can you change your identity? So if you want to make changes in your life, don't focus on the actions, right? So you want to quit smoking, so you want to get in shape, so you want to spend more time working on a side project or build a business or advance your career or read a book a month or something like that. You want to think about why. Why do you want these things? What kind of person do you want to become? And what I would have you do is visualize in your mind the kind of person, I've talked about this in a few different ways, but I want you to visualize in your mind the kind of person that you would like to be, like your ideal self. Like, look at this person in a very, very detailed way. Close your eyes. Think about, what do you look like? How do you talk? How do you dress, right? How do you walk, right? What is this kind of person, this kind of ideal person? It doesn't even have to be you, right? But just this ideal person image that you have in your mind. And then, I've talked about this idea of faking it till you make it. You can check out the video here. And it's kind of an older video, but it's the same concept, right? And there's lots of ways to look at this, but essentially what you're going to do is you're going to start acting like that person. I call it acting as if you already achieved the goal that you want to achieve, acting as if you're already the person that you wanted to be, acting as if you could not fail, or acting as if you've done this 1,000 times before. You want to very powerfully implant this idea of acting as if in your mind, because what you act like, you eventually will become. That's you can change yourself through your actions by acting. And the thing is, it's not just modifying behavior, right? Because if you do this, if you said, okay, well, I'm going to act as if someone's not going to smoke, so I'm not going to smoke, that's not enough. That's why you have to have this full visualization, because just changing the action is very, very hard. It requires a huge amount of willpower. But if you change the concept of who you are, the concept of your being, of your identity, if you dissociate from this poor identity that you had as an unhealthy person, as, you know, lazy person, as a bum, as this, and you reassociate with this new identity. If you picture in your mind this new person that you want to become, and you start acting as if you're that person, right? The actions are coming from the actual vision of the person that you want to become. It's not that you're changing the actions in order to become the person you want to become. You see the difference here? This is such a key difference in making a resolution and actually promoting or having real lasting change in yourself. Is you've got to drive it from the right way. You cannot drive it from actions. Just abstaining from actions or doing specific actions does not necessarily change you, right? What happens though is that you have the mental viewpoint, you have the mental view of who you want to be. You change that context, you change that identity, and then that causes you to act in such a way that's congruent with that new identity, and then that feedback mechanism actually changes who you are. So in effect, you're changing yourself from your actions, but those actions, those new actions, are driven out of this new context, this new identity that you've created for yourself, that you've adopted, that you're acting as if, that you know, because, you know, like I said, you've got this struggle, which is sort of a catch-22, right? You're from that Cybernetics, your mind cannot act in a way that's not congruent with your ego, with what your current identity is. So how do you then change, you know, if you've got to change your actions, how do you change your identity if your mind is going to do what it thinks you are, and you can't necessarily change that concept, right? A lot of change has to come from action. So the way that you get out of that catch-22 is that you visualize, you change the vision. You know you're not, because you can't trick yourself. You can't lie to yourself, right? Your mind knows that you are not the person that you want to be. But if you visualize and you have a very clear picture of who that person is, that identity, and you say, I am going to act, I'm going to pretend like I'm already that person. I'm going to put on their shoes. I'm going to put on their coat. I'm going to act like that person. I have the idea in my mind, right? For you guys out there, I'm an outgoing person who has no problem talking to girls, and to, you know, I have no problem with that. That's that vision of that suave, kind of never afraid, doesn't even get a butterfly in his stomach type of guy. And if I'm acting like that, right, or whatever your particular situation is, if you're acting like that, your mind can accept that. It can accept that you're acting like that person, and so that will allow you to have the behaviors of that person, and that behavior will eventually change who you actually are, because the more that you're acting that way, the more that will change your real identity, and then pretty soon it won't be acting. And so this is the way to create the real changes. And most of the big changes that I've had in my life have come from this, where I have basically said, well, you know, for instance, those of you that have been following me for a while, you know that I used to hate running, and I would not ever call myself a distance runner. I'm not built to be a distance runner. I don't look like a distance runner, right? At least, you know, that was my old way of thinking. But I started saying, well, what if I started acting like, what would, you know, if I was going to run distances and compete in long endurance races and stuff like that, how would this person look? How would I feel about myself? How could I be this? And I came up with this vision in my head of this guy that was still buff, that was still ripped, but was doing these incredible distance events and doing it fasted, right? And I came up with this vision of this guy that was doing this stuff, and then I was able to do it, right? My body allowed me to do it, and then I eventually became that, and so now I am that. Now I'm a guy that runs 40 miles a week, right? That's something I never envisioned before, but it started with the vision. It didn't start with me forcing myself to go out and run 40 miles a week. That would have never happened. Instead, what it started with was me coming up with the vision, coming up with the idea, coming up with the identity of this, you know, the person who I am and who I want to become, and saying, okay, I can act like I'm that person. I can start acting like that. I can start pretending to be that person. And as I pretended and pretended and pretended, and that started causing me to do the actions that kind of person would do, I eventually became that person, and now there's no difference. And the next step that I'm going to take, the next thing I'm going to transform into, is going to be something similar, right? And so it all starts from that process. So instead of saying, I'm going to lose 20 pounds, you know, this year, or I'm going to get in shape, or I'm going to do all this, and setting all these New Year's resolutions, instead, just take some time and visualize in your head the person your ideal person, the ideal person that you want to become, the ideal person that if you could become anything, you would become this, and visualize it down to the lowest level of detail. And then just start pretending like you already are. Just act as if you are that person. Start putting on, becoming an actor, and it's amazing. It's like a hack. Your mind will allow you to do that. It will allow you to pretend to be something, because that's authentic. That's real. We can't be but who we are, but being the person who's pretending to be this thing, that's a totally valid thing. And once you start doing that, and you'll be taking those actions, and those actions will lead to the real permanent lasting change. So that's how you get out of that catch-22. And I think a lot of people try to force it from the actions, or they try to lie to themselves and pretend like they give themselves positive affirmations, which they don't believe. But this is the shortcut. This is the actual trick that will actually work, that will actually perform, will create this lasting change in your life. You gotta visualize it, and you gotta play that part, play that role, and that's it. Sometimes context shifts is all it takes to produce a change. If you like this video, go ahead and click that subscribe button. Let's conquer 2017 together, changing our lives, changing our actions through our new identities, and ever forming and evolving and growing those identities together. Click that subscribe button, and we'll make the journey. Talk to you next time. Take care.